Hey everyone, Scott here to discuss Tears of the Sun, starring Bruce Willis, Monica Bellucci, Cole Hauser, Eamon Walker, Johnny Messner, Nick Chinland, I don't know if I said that right, please forgive me, Charles Ingram, Paul Francis, Chad Smith, and Tom Skerritt, directed by Antoine Fuqua. Now, before I get into this, I have seen this movie before in theaters, and what do I think of it? Well, it's going to be the same as I'm about to think of it now. Let's get into it. As Special Ops Commander Lieutenant A.K. Waters, played by Bruce Willis, comes back to a ship somewhere near Africa with his team and greeted by Captain Bill Rhodes, played by Tom Skerritt, and tells them they after they get back from a mission, they have another mission for them to go to Nigeria and save Dr. Lena Flora Kendricks, played by Monica Bellucci, as she'll come out with the same year with these Matrix sequels, as well as a priest and a couple of nuns if they wanted to join. But the most important is Dr. Kendricks, who bugged the living shit out of me this whole movie, while the character Bruce Willis is playing is no fun to watch either, and neither is Tom Skerritt, or any of these characters are no fun to watch in any way necessary, as they feel very one note, and we barely get to know them either. Lieutenant Waters tells them they have to get the hell out of Nigeria right away, while she wants to bring her whole village of 70 people with them, but he can't do that while her village will be a war zone by those rebels that are the bad guys of this movie. And this plot is the same fucking plot I've seen in The Replacement Killers, but in a war movie. And that's a real problem from the get-go. Lieutenant Waters brings the director, as well as 70 people at the doctor, as well as 70 people at the location the helicopter will pick them up at, while the priest and the two nuns were stupid enough to stay in the war zone, and they'll get killed later in the film, as this is an unacceptable job done by director Antoine Fuqua, as this movie is already getting ridiculously stupid from the get-go. Meanwhile, the doctor was really getting on my last fucking nerves, as a baby cries and the soldier hide the villagers from the bad guys, and they have to keep the baby quiet while the bad guys, the rebels, let's call them, are looking for them. And I'll give the movie this, that it can be intense at times, so I'll give it a couple of points for that. While it doesn't change my opinion of the film, the cinematography looked pretty bad, and Nigeria cannot look any better than how this movie was filmed looked bad as well. The priest and two nuns get killed, and if only they came with Lieutenant Waters and the soldiers in the first place. While we get back to the soldiers at the location of the soldiers, and where they'll take a helicopter back to base, but not the villagers, and Dr. Kendricks is pissed at Lieutenant Waters at first, but he reluctantly changes his mind and goes back from the villagers after showing Dr. Kendricks the dead bodies of her other villagers. And come on, how many times have I seen this plot in so many movies? At this point, this is unfortunately not very original for a war movie. And is this based on a true story? Because it doesn't look like it. And that's a big problem with this movie, as this is not original whatsoever. The soldiers get 12 villagers because that's how much they could fit in the helicopter, while leaving others, including the soldiers, behind, and Captain Rhodes is pissed at Lieutenant Waters for bringing 12 villagers instead of themselves. And Dr. Kendricks, while the warlord, is tracking them. And this movie is irritating because it makes very poor choices for plot reasons that I cannot understand. Whenever Dr. Kendricks makes a decision, it makes no sense. And that leads to a terrible film, and this is and rather a forgettable war movie, in my opinion. And back when this movie came out, there were plenty of the war movies coming out because of the events of 9/11. And I could name 3 off the top of my head. We Were Soldiers with Mel Gibson, Heart's War, another forgettable Bruce Willis war movie, and God Help Me, Wind Talkers with Nicolas Cage. And out of any of those 3 movies, and the one that was the worst, they see the rebels, which is what the bad guys are called, murdering people. And am I the only one thinking Star Wars at this point? Because they're the rebels, with a big difference in Star Wars. They were called the rebels to fight the Empire, as they were the good guys, whereas these rebels are the bad guys. See what I mean with the choices being so poor? The soldiers and the villagers go through the rebels, and while the soldiers kill them bastards, and they get more of them out of there. And this movie is, for an R rating, is playing this war pretty damn safe, and this makes no sense. And it is a questionable choice as far as I'm concerned. Dr. Kendricks brings a villager in a house where a soldier kills a rebel while he killed the family, and that choice was questionable. Like, why the fuck did the doctor bring one of her own inside to begin with, as that bothered me while she survived this piece of action sequence. The soldiers rescued the innocent villagers, and I honestly was getting kind of bored, as this is not a good war movie. But to me, Windtalkers will always be the worst in my opinion. But this is a bad war movie for sure, as it wastes my time, and this is why I was dreading to finish this movie off and going through a second viewing while taking notes for the show. And I'm going to pull off another Screamers again. I just can't do that again. But despite it's a different kind of war movie, this is a better movie than Screamers in my opinion. The rebels are getting closer and closer to the soldiers, and the villagers, thanks to a villager named Saul, who's been leading the rebels to them because he wants to save his family, which is such a questionable choice. And to have him around in the first place, and Lieutenant Waters counts to 5 and threatens people by cutting them up, and one villager confesses he had no choice but to go with them for his father reasons. And I don't understand what's happening at this point, and I'm getting bored out of my mind while this movie was making questionable choices, like I said. The rebels get to the soldiers and villagers, and they put a couple of explosions on the rebels while Captain Rhodes says he can't rescue any planes. He can't send any rescue planes, to get the soldiers and villagers out of there, as they had no choice but to trade for a villager trader named Arthur to the rebels and force themselves and the villagers to safety and get going to a safety. And why is this movie still going? As this is getting more and more boring by the time we get to an hour and a half into the movie, and this is when the action sequence is about to begin. One of the soldiers gets shot by a sniper, and the soldiers fight with guns, bazookas, and grenades as against the rebels. And Dr. Kendrick just gets knocked out a couple of times, but she wakes up while the one other soldiers get shot and killed. And this is a climax that makes no damn sense. They continue to fight back with the rebels, and the soldiers call for help while in action, which is something I can't believe, while they send some planes to give the rebels on an explosion, and some of the soldiers and villagers make their escape with Lieutenant Waters, while Dr. Kendricks is once again knocked the fuck out, and the rebels rampage while the soldiers fall back, and some of them are killed, and the villagers help them out barely. And I'll say, and Lieutenant Waters falls down while Dr. Kendricks wakes up again and gets Dr. Kendricks as well as the villagers out of the war zone, while Lieutenant Waters goes back to the fight while talking with Base, and the villagers try to talk with the gatekeepers to let them through, and a couple of planes come by and put explosives on the rebels' asses, while a couple of choppers come by, and Lieutenant Waters and 3 soldiers make it out alive and wounded, and Captain Rhodes lets the soldiers and Dr. Kendricks through the gate, as well as the villagers, and they thank Lieutenant Waters and the remaining soldiers. And this climax, as well as this movie, is unfortunately forgettable, as I already forgot about this movie and how this movie ended already. Now it's time for my rating. I'll give this movie a 3.5 out of 10. This is an unacceptable job by director Antoine Fuqua, as he's done this plot before, but it's in a slightly better movie than this, in my opinion, called The Replacement Killers, as this is not entertaining like that movie was, while the characters were no fun to watch, and they were one note, and it's very hard to like any of them as we barely get to know them. The movie is ridiculously stupid, and the doctor character really got on my last fucking nerve. While I could have fixed this script from the get-go, and the cinematography looks bad, as the location could not get any better in this movie. And I've seen better movies filmed in Nigeria, but this is unfortunately not one of them. It's very forgettable and not original whatsoever, and that was a real problem with this particular war movie. And what did Antoine Fuqua did was very inexcusable to recommend this, as this is a non-recommendation for this movie, and the script needed some fixing. So I'd like to thank you guys for joining me, and next time we'll be back with King Arthur. And until then, here we go.